Well, good evening and welcome to this recital on jazz on British Pathé and other clips. And first of all, begin by thanking Jason for his technical support this evening. Thank you very much, Jason. Pathé News, just to give you a little introduction to this, I was a producer of newsreels and documentaries from 1910 to 1970 in the United States, United Kingdom. Its founder, Charles Pathé, was a pioneer of moving pictures in the silent era. The Pathé News Archive is known today as British Pathé. British Pathé is considered to be the finest newsreel archive in the world. It spans the years from 1896 to 1978, and its collections include footage from around the globe of major events, famous faces, fashion trends, travel, science, and culture. The newsreels were usually short clips shown in the cinema and preceded the main film. Some of you may remember, if you're a little bit older, you may remember this type of newsreel that was there before the film actually started. In the 1930s through to the 1950s, British Pathé's cinema newsreels and documentaries made a considerable contribution in presenting British jazz to its audiences. So I'd like to start just with a brief example of this, Jason. And this first one, and I'll say a little bit more detail about it, is by Harry Parry and his band. And the title of it is called Hot Dogs from 1942.
By those clever young hot dogs of swing and favourites of the air, Harry Parry and his Radio Rhythm Club Sextet.
Yes, Harry Parry and his band. And I'll say more about Harry later. And you may have noticed that a very fine guitarist, Joe Denise, was in the background there and had a little solo. I'd like to just give you some useful context on the clips that I've selected, and particularly the clips for the first half. Not all are British Pathé. There are some recordings accompanied by a montage of pictures. However, I think they do illustrate, often charmingly, the social milieu of the times. So I hope you don't mind some music with pictures as well as the clips. To begin at the beginning, really, in 1935, as a result of a disagreement between the British Musicians Union and the American Federation of Musicians, a mutual ban was introduced that prevented jazz bands and groups from either country performing in their respective countries. This created a cultural vacuum that, in jazz terms, had to be covered by British musicians. The experience of the US musician trumpeter Sylvester Ahola gives some indication of the difficulties experienced. In 1927, he moved to England and landed a job playing with the Savoy Orpheans, and later worked with the orchestras of Bert Furman and Bert Ambrose. The British Musicians Union, unhappy to see a foreigner land so many jobs and attain so much success, effectively prohibited him from playing with anyone else except Bert Ambrose. This forced Ahola eventually to leave in 1931 and return to New York City, where he never again achieved the level of success he enjoyed during his time in Britain. He did actually have a very long life, being born in 1902 and died in 1995. However, when the band was introduced in 1935, as evidently directed, and it could have been a lot worse actually, it was limited to jazz ensembles. Individual US musicians could still work in the UK in a solo capacity with British musicians, but not bring a US group or a big band with them. So Coleman Hawkins worked for a time with Jack Hilton's orchestra. Benny Carter moved to London in 1936 and for 2 years was an arranger for the BBC Dance Band. Clarinetist and reed man Danny Polo came to England in 1927 when he worked with Bert Furman. From 1930 to 1935, Polo was with the Ambrose Orchestra, returning to the US in December 1935. In 1938, Polo returned to Britain to work with Ambrose. Late in 1939, he moved back to the US permanently and spent the early 1940s working with Joe Sullivan, Jack Teagarden, and I think he was involved in some degree with Bing Crosby's film Birth of the Blues. He later then joined the Claude Thornhill Orchestra, a progressive band, and sadly died in 1949 at the age of 47. So in the absence of regular touring US bands in the UK in the interwar years, particularly after 1935, this prevented arguably an invaluable cultural exchange. The following, to some extent, illustrates the vacuum that the Musicians' Union bands created. 1940, Paul Whiteman's orchestra in the Royal Albert Hall in their concert on April 11th, 1926, was one of the most important performances that Paul Whiteman and his orchestra gave during its second European tour. The concert was sold out. The 8,000-seat hall packed to capacity. 5,000 people had to be turned away. No previous orchestral concert had managed to fill the venue to capacity. After 1935, this was no longer possible until after 1956, when the ban was lifted. Duke Ellington, for example's first tour in 1933 was crucial to Ellington's career as a band leader and composer. In the previous year, Ellington had been growing increasingly frustrated with the attitude of music publishers and the popular music scene. "I felt it was all a racket. I was on the point of giving up," he told the New York journalist Richard Boyer in 1944. But his reception in Britain revived him. "The main thing I got in Europe was spirit. It lifted me out of the groove. That kind of thing gives you courage to go on with a lot of things you want to do yourself." Well, many Britons were, of course, familiar with Ellington's music through his 78 3-minute records. Enthusiastic reviews of these by Constance Lambert, an influential classical composer, had ensured that Ellington's prestige was high. The most powerful promotion came from the Weekly Melody Maker that had run regular articles leading up to the tour. So there was a lot of interest in seeing the 14-piece Duke Ellington Orchestra on stage. The 1933 European tour was his first abroad, and the reception was overwhelming. His liner was met by some musical dignitaries at Southampton Docks, and he was soon ensconced in the new Dorchester Hotel in London. His musicians were all surprised at the enthusiastic crowds that greeted them wherever they went. Clarinetist Barney Bigard's reaction when the band arrived by train in London was typical. "As we stepped off the train, they were calling everybody by their names. 'Here's Barney, here's Hodges, here's Cootie, here's Tricky Sam.' They recognized everybody. That was a surprise to me." The initial welcome was nothing compared to the ovation his orchestra received on the opening night at the London Palladium. The reaction of the capacity 2,300 audience was deafening. Ellington recalled, "That was a night that scared the devil out of the whole band. The applause was terrifying. It was applause beyond applause. Our first show there was 10 minutes of continuous applause. The acclamation came after Ellington's fans had waited through 12 supporting acts that had lasted an hour and a half. Again, such scenes for a visiting band would not be seen, in Ellington's case, until at least 1958. British Pathé played a now much overlooked part in making British jazz in Britain accessible to a wider public. What we're about to see does not match, of course, the finest from New Orleans, Chicago, and New York, but these groups and musicians kept the jazz flag flying in Britain. It must be remembered that the entire swing era from 1935 to 1945 came and went without a single US swing band touring the UK. The musicians that we will see held the fort and did it well and much better than their critics proclaimed. Most of the tracks I've chosen are film clips, but for others, as I've said, I retained the photo montages that accompanied the music. It's a very reflect the popular culture of the time. So I'd like to turn now back to Harry Parry, who opened the proceedings this evening. Harry was a most significant figure on the UK jazz scene in the 1940s and 50s. Now largely forgotten, it seems. He was a regular on Pathé News. Harry was born in Bangor in Wales. He was proficient on cornet, tenor horn, flugelhorn, drums and violin, but he specialised in the clarinet and saxophone from 1927. He moved to London in 1932. After playing with several dance bands, he eventually formed his own six-piece unit. In 1940, when he was selected by the BBC to lead the band for the radio club show, he had a band to cover that. He then proceeded to record over 100 titles for Parlophone records with his sextet, which included the young George Shearing and the singer Doreen Villiers. After the war, Parry worked extensively for radio and television, including as a disc jockey, and even took acting parts. He toured worldwide as a band leader in the 1940s and 50s, including in the Middle East and India. Parry was a fine player, but often criticised for his clear derivation from Benny Goodman, as you heard at the start. He died, sadly, in his flat in Mayfair, London, in October 1956. So the following clips do not actually give much personnel details, but let's take another clip now and get back to music. So this is Harry Parry and his sextet from 1947. Now, they're playing Honeysuckle Rose, normally, as you know, credited to Andy Razaf and Fats Waller, but I notice a record producer from Italy, Felice Paracarda, has put his name on the credits here for this. So this is the Harry Parry Sextet from 1947 with Honeysuckle Rose.
Honeysuckle rose. When you're passing by, flowers droop and sigh, and I know the reason why. You're much sweeter, goodness knows, my honeysuckle rose. You're my sugar, you just have to taste my cup. You're my sugar, it's sweet when you stir it up. Oh, when I'm taking sips from your tasty lips, seems honey fairly drips. Your confection, goodness knows, my honeysuckle rose.
Harry Parry there. And I think the vocalist was Doreen Villiers. There's no credits given, but I think it was her. We're just going to move on now to Harry Parry and his Radio Club Sextet, which again recorded quite regularly after the war. We're going to hear first of all "You Are My Lucky Star." I think this is from the Broadway musical Melody of 1936. Had a big hit in America with Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra. The film, I think, starred Eleanor Powell, the great American dancer at the time. Before we do that, though, I think I should just say a little bit about Harry Parry's personnel. One of the interesting things you may have picked up from the clips that we've seen so far is that we had Joe Denise on guitar, and I think in the piece we're going to see the great piano player York de Souza. Now, these are West Indian musicians, and this was the 1940s, and it says a lot for Harry Parry that he employed those musicians because they did experience problems in England, and in particular, some of the musicians who joined other bands were not made to feel very welcome at all. But Harry gave Joe Denise and York de Souza prominent roles in his band, and that was very good for him. The other musicians, apart from that, was also Dave Wilkins, I think was West Indian as well. Sam Molyneux on bass, Sid Raymond on drums, and the vibe player that we saw before was Roy Marsh. So we'll hear first of all "You Are My Lucky Star" from the Radio Rhythm Club Sextet. You Are My Lucky Star there, Harry Parry. We're going to finish our memories of Harry Parry now with Harry Parry and his radio quartet. Now, I'm sorry, we have no personnel for this, although there's a very fine piano solo here. This is from 1947. It's the Dorothy Fields and Jimmy McHugh number, Exactly Like You. Harry Parry and his radio quartet. Yes, Harry Parry there, exactly like you, from 1947. I'm going to take a band now that the British Pathé managed to catch it before the recording ban, and this was in 1931. The band was Noble Sissle, who was doing a tour of Britain and Europe at this time. And I'd just like to give you, again, a little bit of a context in relation to Noble Sissle's career, because it does explain to some degree the type of clip we're going to see shortly. In 1916, Noble Sissle joined one of the society orchestras in America, organized by James Reese Europe in New York. He persuaded Europe to hire his friend and the pianist and composer U.B. Blake, whom he first met in Baltimore, and later in the year, he helped Europe organize a regimental band for the 15th Infantry Regiment, brackets colored, of the New York National Guard. After the US entry into the First World War, the band became known as the New York 39th Infantry Hellfires Regiment, and it was sent to France under the direction of James Reese Europe, then a lieutenant, with Noble Sissle as a sergeant and as lead vocalist. In the history of jazz, this band was very important. Unlike most military bands, it played syncopated music and was credited by introducing jazz to France. Sissle left the army after the war as a second lieutenant with the 307th Infantry Regiment, and he joined James Reese Europe's civilian version of the 369 band. Sissle began recording for the Pathé label in early 1917, because the Pathé also had a record label as well as the newsreels. And he sang several vocals on Pathé discs recorded by Europe's band in early 1919, after it had become a civilian band. Tragically, on May the 9th, 1919, James Europe was murdered by a disgruntled band member in Boston, leaving Sissle, with the help of U.B. Blake, to take temporary charge of the band. Soon after World War I, then, Sissle joined forces with Blake to form a vaudeville musical duo. And after vaudeville, the pair began to work on the jazz musical revue Shuffle Along, which incorporated many songs they had written. When it premiered in 1921, Shuffle Along became the first hit musical on Broadway written by and about African Americans. It was the first all-black show to reach the Broadway stage in over a decade, and included a teenage Josephine Baker among the performers. One of the famous songs from it was I'm Just Wild About Harry and Love Will Find a Way. Sissle and his band toured UK in 1931, which is where we catch up with him. British Pathé Weekly had filmed the band at Cicero's nightclub in London, performing Walter Donaldson's Little White Lies and Happy Feet, written by Jackie Allen and Milton Agar. We see the continuing influence and vaudeville in this performance. Noble Sissle conducts his band, then he turns to the camera and starts singing Little White Lies. several shots of the band playing, and then Sissel and the band also play another song called Happy Feet, and one member of the band takes to the floor and performs a tap dancing solo. Again, you can see the vaudeville, and incidentally, in some of the tracks that are coming up, you'll also see this kind of stage performance. Actually, in 1932, after this tour, Sidney Bechet joined Noble Sisters Orchestra when it toured the UK, Germany, and Russia. And it was in the UK that Bechet had his celebrated encounter with the law and his discovery of the soprano saxophone. So let's hear Noble Sissel and his band now, 1931, from British Pathé, and Happy Feet in the first instance. Thanks, Jason. Rather abrupt ending there. The brass bass player did very well, didn't he? Did the tap dancing and did the bassing as well. Let's turn now to another figure on the British jazz scene who became a very significant figure for a time, and that was Spike Hughes. Now, Spike Hughes formed his own group, his first jazz group, in 1930. The group was one of the earliest artists assigned to the Decca Records in England, and it recorded over 30 sessions for Decca between 1930 and 1933. Originally billed as Spike Hughes and his Decca Dents, he reportedly didn't like the name, and after 3 sessions he changed it to Spike Hughes and his Dance Orchestra, or if it was a small group, his 3 Blind Mice. Hughes used the Chen Hill Galleries in Kings Road, Chelsea as his recording venue, and in April 1930, he persuaded the visiting Jimmy Dorsey to visit Chelsea for some sessions. These records were used as the basis for the hastily assembled jazz ballet High Yellow, which was put on at the Savoy Theatre in London in June 1932. Choreography for the ballet was by Frederick Ashton and Buddy Bradley. The title comes from a now once widely used but discredited term, High Yellow, describing mixed black and white ancestry. From 1931, Hughes played regularly with the Jack Hilton Band, but his career in jazz culminated in 1933 with a visit to New York, where he could go at that point without problems, and he arranged 3 recording sessions involving members of Benny Carter's and Louis Russell's orchestra with Coleman Hawkins and Henry Red Allen from Fletcher Henderson's band. The track we're going to hear is by Hughes's Dance Orchestra. It has in it people like trumpeter Max Goldberg and the aforementioned reed man Danny Polo. And this is a piece called I Would Like to Do Things for You, Spike Hughes and his Dance Orchestra from 1930. Yes, that was Spike Hughes and his Dance Orchestra. I think the nice trumpet player was Max Bacon there. I think also, and no doubt Jason will correct me, I think that piece, I Like to Do Things for You, was also recorded by Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, and possibly the Rhythm Boys in the early 1930s. I'd like to turn now to another big name of the scene who really held the fort again during the American band and British band. This is Jack Payne, who was born in 1899 and died in 1969. Jack was a leading figure on the British orchestral scene in the interwar years. He played with visiting American jazz bands at the Birmingham Pathé in the early 1920s before moving to London in 1925. He played in a 10-piece band, which became the house band at London's Cecil Hotel in 1935. And this ensemble regularly performed on the BBC in the latter half of the decade, the latter half of the 20s. In 1928, in fact, Payne became the BBC Director of Dance Music and the leader of the BBC's first official dance band. In 1929, the band was featured in the first ever British television broadcast, appearing in a short film, Jazz Time. The signature tune was Say It with Music, written by Irving Berlin, but we're going to hear a version of Tiger Rag. And when you look at this, you see Jack himself was pretty fluent in French, because this is from a Paris concert, and the band was spot on in getting the attention on stage. So we're here now, Jack Payne and his band, and Tiger Rag.
Messieurs, nous allons jouer une orchestration moderne du classique du jazz, Tiger Rag.
I think Jack Payne must have sent his lads to the gym before they went on to the concert, really. That was Jack Payne and his orchestra from a Paris concert in the 1930s, 1935. Well, we're turning now to another big figure in the interwar years, and that was Harry Roy. Born in 1900, he died in 1971. He was born Harry Lipman in Stamford Hill in London, and he learned the piano at the age of 7, but then went on to study clarinet and alto saxophone and was proficient in both at the age of 16. From the early 30s, Harry Roy was fronting his own band, the Archaeolians, and broadcasting from the Café Anglais and the Mayfair Hotel. During the Second World War, Roy toured with his smaller group, the Tagger Ragamuffins, which we'll see later. He was at the Embassy Club in 1942, and a little later he toured the Middle East, entertaining troops. He had a singer with him called Mary Lee. In 1948, Harry Roy travelled to the United States, but he was refused a work permit, not quite sure why, unless he was trying to bring a band with him. Returning to Britain, he reformed his band and scored a hit with his recording of Leicester Square Rag. Well, we're going to see Harry now and his Tagger Ragamuffins, a 6-piece traditional band. They play Basin Street Ball with Harry Roy on clarinet, and the band goes through various changes of dress. So this is Harry Roy and his band in Basin Street Ball from 1942.
if you'll excuse the lads while they change, they'll change. Band, right dress.
Harry Roy there. Let's just move on with Harry to another Ragamuffins issue. This was a piece called Rolling Stones from 1943.
Finally, we bring to the mic some people who actually said they would swing for us. We mean those famous musical swingsters, Harry Roy's Tiger Ragamuffins.
You notice that there's a segue into a smooth one there, a Benny Goodman piece from Roy Fox and his Ragamuffins. Well, one of the very famous and I think probably one of the most talented of the soloists in the interwar years was trumpeter Nat Ganella. And Nat Ganella, I think, suffered the same kind of problem that Harry Parry did, which is they were virtuosi on their instruments, but if they were familiar, if they owed something to Benny Goodman, as Harry Parry did, and obviously as Nat Ganella did to Louis, they fell between the two stools and were often criticised because of their virtuosity, really. Anyway, we're going to listen to a track now. This is a slightly amusing thing with Nat Ganella and his Georgians. It's from a clip. Well, I suppose it's a clip of film, you could say. But the person who introduces it, you'll recognise. It's Jimmy Perry, who was one of the co-writers of Dad's Army. So I'll hand over to him now. Thanks, Jason.
It is Nat Ganella and his Georgians.
Glad you decided to come here.
It was a good guess, wasn't it?
just let's have one dance.
We can't possibly dance to this.
Nat Ganella and his Georgians. I've no idea what that waiter was doing with those plates, but how about the dialogue between the two bright young things? Wonderful. Well, I hope that brings back some happy...
The bowls.
Well, I hope you feel grateful for me, because now you know how to chat up a lady when you're in the club. I hope you'll take that away with you this evening. Now, one of the things I would say there, you did notice the absolute virtuosity of Ganella there. He really was a first-class player. And did you notice the rather curious embouchure he had? And the way in which he held the trumpets is very, very extraordinary. I think the only person I've seen was Digby Farewell that does that nowadays. They hold the trumpet sort of slightly to one side. I'm going to do something now to hope Sid doesn't mind, because some time ago he did his normal and customary erudite and entertaining recital on Valida Snow, trumpet player. And I'm just going to play a Valida Snow track here, because I thought really she did sum up the culture and standards of the time. And it's obviously a time we had a woman on the recital as well. So this is Valida Snow, who was born in 1904 and died in 1956. And this is a piece that she was involved in called Hi-Hat, Trumpet and Rhythm and St. Louis Blues. And we're just going to hear that now.
I've got my hi-hat, trumpet, and rhythm, and I'm ready to swing. Hi, hi, ho, ho, won't you swing with me? I've got a brand new song to go with them, and I'm ready to swing. Hi, hi, ho, ho, won't you swing with me? Set your tempo, not fast, not slow. Ready, let's go. Everybody swing, say, I got my hi-hat, trumpet, and rhythm. I'm ready to swing. Hi, hi, ho, ho, won't you swing with me? Got my hi-hat, trumpet, and rhythm, and I'm ready, so help me. Hi, 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 ho, ho, won't you swing with me? I got a brand new song to go with them, and I'm ready to swing. Swing with me. Now set your tempo, set your tempo. Don't want it fast, don't want it slow. Ready, let's go, boys. Everybody swing with me. Hi-hat, trumpet, and rhythm, and I'm ready to swing. Hi, 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 ho, ho. Won't you swing with me? Mwah. I can be. Well, my man's got a heart just like a rock cast in the sea. The rest he wouldn't stay so far from woo. I've just got the St. Louis blues, got the St. Louis blues. Oh, baby, don't you
ain't cheap. You truck on down, you can't be beaten and you go to town. Ooh my, I got the St. Louis blues. Talk to me, boys, yowza, yowza.
Yeah, for let us know they're doing superb work as always. Billy Cotton is a name not generally recognized for his jazz credentials, but again, as I was saying at the very beginning this evening, there were people who stepped into the breach when the American bands weren't here, and Billy Cotton, I think, certainly was one of those. A lot of famous jazz musicians did play in his band, including Sidney Lipton and Nat Gonella. And he led his band during the 1920s and 1930s. And of course, some of the older listeners may remember the Billy Cotton Band Show that used to be on at the weekends, which he shouted, "Wakey, wakey, hi," and so on. And always seemed to have his eye on the chorus girls, but that was the standard of the time, I guess. But he did actually have quite a good jazz band. And we hear his signature tune was "Somebody Stole My Gal." But we're going to hear a famous hit of the 1930s. This is from 1938. It's Billy Cotton and his band with the Lambeth Walk. I think the vocalist may be Alan Breeze, but I don't know. So we'll hear the Lambeth Walk, Billy Cotton and his band from 1938.
Anytime you're Lambeth way, any evening, any day, you'll find us all doing the Lambeth walk. Every little Lambeth gal with a little Lambeth pal, you'll find them all doing the Lambeth walk. Everything free and easy, do as you darn well please thee. Why don't you make your way there? So there, stay there. Once you get down Lambeth way, every evening, every day, you'll find yourself doing the Lambeth walk.
Billy Cotton there and the Lambeth Walk. And just to take us up to the interval now, we're going to look at a soloist. And this was an important soloist, an American musician, Garland Wilson, born in 1909 and died in 1954. But he was a long resident in Britain and Europe and made many important recordings with various groups. In 1932, Garland Wilson joined the singer Nina Mae McKinney on a European tour. McKinney was one of the first Afro-American film stars in the United States and a singer as well, and one of the first African Americans to appear on British television. In January 1934, Wilson and McKinney departed for a tour of the Côte d'Azur, beginning in Nice, France. They ended up being a tour that lasted over 5 months. It embraced England at one point, and Wilson stayed here for a while, recorded extensively with local groups, including Nat Gun Ellis. But here we're going to hear him taking us up to the interval at the keyboard in 1940 with just one of those things, Garland Wilson. And that was Garland Wilson ending the first part. Thank you very much. Well, hello again, and thank you to part 2 of my recital on jazz on British Pathé and other clips. Well, the break was neatly timed because this section of the recital brings us to the post-war years. As I mentioned at the beginning this evening, there was, in my view, this great cultural gap that was caused by the musicians' ban And to some degree, this was breaking down, although it didn't break down formally until 1956. And clearly the presence in Britain of bands like the Glenn Miller's Army Air Force Band and Sam Donohue's Navy Band did break that gap to some degree. But already, of course, the music coming in from the swing era via the 78s was obviously having an impact in Britain. And we will see this quite clearly in the first of the great British big bands moving into the more modern era. And this was the Squadronnaires. So I just want to give you a sort of introduction to the Squadronnaires, and then we'll be playing a selection of their music. The wartime Squadronnaires band was a swinging instrumental unit. It had a number of famous people in it, and I'll give you the personnel of it shortly. It was a Royal Air Force band which began and performed in Britain during and after World War II. The official title of the band was the Royal Air Force Dance Orchestra, but it was always known by its more popular title, the Squadronnaires. The idea for the band originated in 1939. The Royal Air Force implemented a plan to raise morale and entertain troops during wartime. As a result of that, the Squadronnaires Orchestra was one of the bands organised. The band drew for some of the best musicians of the day. It became a popular jazz band and likely the best known of the British military bands of that time. It had hits like There's Something in the Air, which we will hear later, and South Rampart Street Parade. The Squadronnaires played at dances and concerts for service personnel and also broadcast on the BBC and recorded on the Decca label. Its first broadcast took place in January 1941, and after D-Day, the Squadronnaires went on to entertain service personnel in the Northwest Europe campaign, but had to return to Britain because of the intensity of military operations. Just to give you an idea of the personnel of the band, because there were some quite significant figures in it, the director of the band was Jimmy Miller. The trumpet player was Tommy McQuater, who became a very important session musician and jazz soloist in the post-war years. Tommy McQuater, Archie Craig and Clinton French on trumpets. Trombone, George Chisholm, who needs no introduction, and Eric Breeze. Saxophonist Tommy Bradbury, Harry Lewis, Jimmy Durant, Andy McDevitt, and Cliff Townsend. Cliff Townsend being incidentally the father of Pete Townsend of the two. The rhythm section was Ronnie Aldridge at the piano, Sid Collins on guitar, Arthur Madden on bass, and Jock Cummings on drums. Now, after demobilisation, the members formed a civilian band of the same name, and we'll hear from that band in a moment. And when I finish this introduction, I'll try and keep my comments to a minimum after this. But after demobilisation, the band formed a civilian band of the same name. Ronnie Aldridge had been the arranger and co-piano player, but in 1951 he took over as band leader of the peacetime Squadronnaires. And the band was then called Ronnie Aldridge and the Squadronnaires. Sid Dale replaced him as pianist and also helped with the arrangements. The band was touring widely by 1951 and was very busy in that year. In 1952, they began a regular summer engagement at the Palace Ballroom in Douglas at the Isle of Man, and this continued right through to 1963. They played in the ballrooms every night except Sundays, and they played in concerts at the Palace Theatre. There was a small version of the band, the Squadronettes, which had a vocal group as well. And the Squadronnaires continued to work under Ronnie Aldridge's direction until 1964. So let's have a sort of sample of this, and we'll take, I think, two together, Jason, if that's okay. We're going to hear in a moment a piece called Rustle, R-U-S-T-L-E, Rustle of Swing, and this will be followed by the Squadronnaires hit, There's Something in the Air from 1941.
Introducing the famous Squadronnaires, led by Jimmy Miller.
Yeah, you'll notice the actual sea change there, and how the bands were really beginning to swing now, naturally swing, after the post-war years. Here, the Squadronaires were made regular appearances on British Pathé and on Government News. Here they are, reflecting in 1952 on the vagaries of travelling around in a big band.
Even the noise of a trombone solo wouldn't wake Charlie Hall. He stuck fast, and so's the coach, which was carrying the Squadronaires dance band up the Great North Road. Bill, the driver, will get a blast from the trumpets if he drops a spanner in the works. A dash of hot music would help to warm the night air, or so thinks Ronnie Aldrich, the famous band's conductor.
How long's it going to be, Bill?
Oh, I'll be as quick as I can go. Say about 10 minutes. Right?
It's going to be 10 minutes, chaps. I think we'd better do right and rear again.
Hot music it is. Marooned by the wayside, the Squadronaires present Riot in Rio.
Well, I'm going to move the band back into more comfortable surroundings now, and the next one we're going to hear from them is I've Found a New Baby. Yeah, I found a new baby, and I think that was unmistakably George Chisholm there on the trombone, probably Tommy McCrater on the trumpet at the end. For the next Jason, again, we'll just take two one after that, if you don't mind, please. We're going to hear, first of all, the Squadronaires playing a track called March of the Movies. And then we move on to the next track, which is in 1956, when the Squadronaires were coming to grips with rock and roll. And it's called Rock and Roll Boogie. So we're going to hear, first of all, March of the Movies, and it will be followed by Rock and Roll Boogie. squadronaires trying to come to terms with rock and roll to some degree. But I'd like to just finish our memories of the squadronaires with a number that was very popular in the early 50s. It was Dizzy Gillespie's composition, The Champ. Many bands had a good workout on it, including Ted Heath, Ronnie Scott, Jack Parnell. Here's the squadronaires version, Dizzy Gillespie's The Champ from 1954. Yeah, The Champ from 1954. I'm sorry I haven't got a personnel for that one. Just before I move back to the post-war years, I just thought you might like to have a look at the legacy of the Squadronaires band today. If you could just put us on to that now, Jason, please. This is the modern Squadronaires. Oh. Well, that was the Squadronaires today. That was a piece called Mr. BG, and the soloist was Sergeant Andy Watson on trombone. Sorry, we're having a phone call here. Moving on. Yeah, going back now to our original theme, which was the post-war years. One of the key figures that emerged as a band leader was Gerald Bright. That wasn't necessarily so because he went through various different types for over 4 decades. He involved himself in different types of music and ensembles. But in the 40s, he produced a really fairly fine band indeed. It contained a number of important people in it, including the future band leader Ted Heath, and the great alto saxophonist Harry Hayes, and a number of important singers, including Doreen Villiers, whom we saw earlier on with Harry Parker. So we're just going to listen to one of Geraldo's biggest hits from 1945, covering Charlie Barnett's Skyliner. And again, Geraldo did appear on Government News and other newsreels, but we're going to see him now in a series of photographs with Skyliner from 1945, Geraldo and his orchestra. Yeah, Geraldo and his band doing a very good job there on Skyliner. We just want to do next, Jason. We'll do another two back to back, so we can just acknowledge Geraldo and move on. We're going to listen to his version of Blues in the Night, the Johnny Mercer, Harold Arlen tune, And I'll just say a little bit about the next one as well. It'll be followed by Coming Through the Rye. Now, this was an arrangement by the American arranger Bill Finnegan, who worked for Tommy Dorsey. Finnegan gave the arrangement to Geraldo, who recorded it a few weeks before Tommy Dorsey's version came out in the United States. So it's nice to see there is this kind of cultural exchange, even though the band is still in place. So we're going to hear Blues in the Night. It's a rather unusual arrangement of it in comparison to the Jimmy Lunsford version. And then it's going to be followed by Coming Through the Rye. And Coming Through the Rye is noted mainly for its very strong attack and ensemble playing. So this is Blues in the Night, and then Coming Through the Rye, Geraldo and his orchestra. Yes, Geraldo coming through the rye. Well, of course, by the 1950s, the big bands were clearly no longer in the ascendant. And as this clip from Pathé News reveals, the small groups were on the way up. Jason, thank you.
Twice a week, London's rhythm enthusiasts of all ages put on their zoot suits and go to town. To be precise, Oxford Street. Here, a normally sedate restaurant surrenders its dignity to the excitement of the dancers and the music of Humphrey Little. It's good fun and good exercise. Rhythm is the only stimulus, as drinks are strictly non-alcoholic.
And now the next number will be, ladies and gentlemen, Snake Riot.
Yeah, folks, they sure went to town on ginger pop.
They certainly did.
Oh,
In 1978, Humph was with Bruce Turner and Roy Williams, went on an Australian tour, and this clip is a rather sentimental approach to Humph's life. We'll just go straight on to it, Jason, if we may. Well, you saw a couple of comforting things there. The first thing was the fact that at long last, British and American musicians were quite happily playing together on the stage without any impediment. And the second, as you may have noticed, was the people staring around the television. And of course, by this point, the television was taking over from the newsreels. And I'd like to finish with two television clips here featuring the John Dankworth Band. I'll just, to save time, I won't introduce each individually. We're going to hear, first of all, Johnny Dankworth's band, Johnny Dankworth, as he was then known as, Just in Time. And then it will be followed in concluding the evening with an arrangement of Runnin' Wild. Now, this second clip is very confusing because the band starts off playing Runnin' Wild, and then there are montages of other aspects of the band's work that bear no relation to Running Wild, but it's such a fine arrangement, I thought we would do that. So we'll just finish with these two, Jason. Thank you very much. Possibly day 3. John Dankworth, as we must now call him, brings our programme to an end. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.